Sunrise Extra on a Wednesday. We are talking restaurants and habits and tipping because Kachka, you may know it, it's a Russian-inspired restaurant. It's won several awards, very delicious food right here in the Central East Side of Portland. They announced yesterday an interesting new business model coming out of the pandemic. So they're getting rid of tips altogether, and they are charging a 22% service fee on every check now, and they say that that is going to allow them. They did months of research on this. They talked to other restaurants, they talked to other industry experts, and they came to this 22% flat fee. And they say it's going to give their employees a base wage of $25 per hour. Some employees will make more than that. Insurance and other benefits. And we want to know what you guys think, because this is kind of a controversial thing. It's a new, I don't know, other restaurants have done something similar to this, but a lot of industry people say something has to change, at least coming out of the pandemic. The wages within, you know, front of house people, back of house people, cooks, all that kind of stuff is so different.
I was going to ask you, is this with this particular restaurant tied to the Great Resignation, where everybody's talking about now that workers who are like changing jobs are getting higher pay because, you know,
because the restaurant and hospitality industry has just been decimated. People have left, you know, they work long hours. It's a messy, often thankless job, you know, or you're back in the kitchen, it's hot, it's uncomfortable, it's long hours, and you don't get paid very much, and you get, you know, there's a lot of not great shifts out there, and so a lot of people were like, ugh, I'm done with this. And so this is, I mean, 25 bucks an hour, that's great, you know, that's more than a lot of people make at other jobs. And so I don't know, like for me, I usually always tip 20%, and so it's maybe a couple dollars more, this service fee, so I don't mind it. I think it's a good idea. Something has to change, but I know people feel differently, so what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's a funny deal because we're just so accustomed to this idea that you go to a restaurant, you pay for, I assume you're paying for the food, right? That's like the initial part of your bill, and then that other part that you paid, the tip, that was for the service you received during your visit to this restaurant. Like you, Nina, you know, 20% is where I usually go, partly because it's the easiest thing to do.
Unless
it's a lot easier to figure out than 18%, that's for sure. So you go with the 20% typically, you know, unless you have some kind of bad experience at the restaurant. My thought was, I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, okay, so they said this will allow them to pay their employees a starting wage of $25 an hour, right? That's because they're counting on this 22% service fee on all the tickets. I just feel like, you know, it's a pretty good salary. I don't know. I guess that you could do it a number of different ways. I guess the other alternative would be they would charge more for the actual food you're buying at the restaurant, right? And you could stick with tips and let people continue to tip how they please, but the restaurants need to make more money, is the bottom line. They find, I was talking to a few different owners this summer or over the summer, about how they want to give their workers health care insurance. A lot of places don't do that, but they want to start doing that. They want to give them fair wages so they can keep the good employees. And they say the only way we can do that is we start charging the customers more. So this is the way this restaurant, Kachka, is doing it. They're putting a 22% service charge on their bills.
Connie Staub-Miller is on the stream, and she says instead of a surcharge, raise the prices. A surcharge still makes it like the service people are the target, like, oh, you want more money. I think that's what she's saying, and kind of makes them the focus. She says raise food prices and pay the employees more.
I think what happens is you look at a menu or you look at something and you're like, oh my God, a hamburger costs what, you know, now. And so I think it's just putting it under a different heading, that money, where I think people, would be more apt to pay this flat fee based on what your total bill is. I mean, if you just order a hamburger, 22% is, you know, whatever. But if you're raising the prices and people are seeing on the menu like, oh my God, an entree is $40 or $50 or, you know, whatever, or a burger and fries is now $20. It's, you know, we've been so accustomed to what we think something should cost that I think that sticks out more as people are be like, ugh, I don't want to come here again. It's way too expensive.
You know, that's what I was going to say, is I think people should vote with their dollars, because some people will say, I can't afford that. And, or some people say, I don't want to do that. Then don't go there, right? But it is interesting how much we love eating out. We really appreciate a good experience, but yet on the opposite side, we're kind of cheap. We don't really want to pay for that experience. We always want to get it for the very least. It's like Walmart or any big box store. It's like, yeah, we like the cheap stuff, but then we kind of see some of the trickle down in some cases where some of the employees have to be on some kind of state assistance because they're not making quite enough money, or they can only get part-time work. So it is a weird web how everything is interconnected, and it's not always pretty.
All right, Rod, you have the floor.
Well, I just think it's like anything else. As a consumer, you're going to decide what's too much money for what you're getting and what's not. So to me, you know, if they put out a really good product, then for a lot of people, it's probably not too much money. But the higher the prices of anything goes, I don't care if it's food or a hammer or whatever, you know, the expectations from the consumer of what they're getting for their dollar goes up too. And you know, I don't think I'm alone when I say that going out to eat in general has gotten to be at an expense where I'm going to say at least 70% of the time when I leave, I'm like, you know, I would have been just as happy with a sandwich at home than the money that we just dropped. Now, on the flip side, if I go out and it was really an experience and I felt like I was rewarded for the dollar I spent, that's wonderful. But to me, that doesn't happen that often, maybe a few times a year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Rod. I think that here's the deal. Kachka, I've not been.
I've not been there either.
Nina, have you been to Kachka?
Yes.
Brenda?
No.
Okay, so Nina, can you speak to the fact that, from what I hear, it's one of Portland's better restaurants?
It's very fine dining. Yes, it's beautifully presented and, you know, interesting flavors. Russian food, you know, a lot of us don't really know what that is or looks like or tastes like, and they make it very approachable and tasty. And she's won, you know, awards and has been, you know, one of kind of Portland's, I mean, lumped in with, you know, premier chefs.
I've only heard good things about the restaurant. So my thought is that people who have gone there have already paid probably a good sum to go and eat at that restaurant for the food, and then they've probably tipped well for the service. It's a nicer restaurant. This is not going to probably change for people who already went to Kachka. Like you said, most of those people, I'm assuming, probably tipped already in the ballpark of 20%. Now they're giving 22%. That won't hurt that bottom line so much. But the overall, I think this overarching idea of tipping is kind of getting out of hand. I don't know if we want to go down that road or not.
Let's
because
do
I know
it.
that's the
I mean,
road
I
that
think
Rod Hill
the
will
point
really
is, like
step
when
on the
we
gas
talked
pedal
with
with.
Kurt Huffman, remember? I mean, he is the head of a large restaurant investment group called Chef's Table. They helped launch Lardo and Grassa and, oh my gosh, so many others. And he was just saying something has to change. Like he cannot, you know, you're seeing all these people getting signing bonuses for like $1,000 to be a line cook at McMinimans or whatever, and many other places, because the money isn't spread out, and restaurants have such slim margins for what they pay for the food to what they feel like they can charge and what people would pay. And you know, a server gets the cash on the table mostly, and the cook or the dishwasher or the busboy, you know, they're just making their money, and servers can make quite a lot on tips, but it's not shared.
During the pandemic, when it first started, like a couple of years ago, I was shocked when we started talking about restaurants in Portland and the rents that they pay just to occupy a building. It was triple what I ever imagined the city would actually command. So I see if they're starting in a hole like that, why they do, you know, need to make a certain amount to, you know, just survive.
Yeah, I've always assumed that, you know, unless you are a top-line star chef, like literally getting celebrity status, that you're doing it because, A, you love to cook, you love the business, you love the industry, not because you're making a killing with your restaurant, right? I mean, it just doesn't seem like a business because of, like you said, all these costs, the employee costs, the rental cost. It seems like such an expensive business to get into. But here's the thing with tipping, and Rod, we've talked about it before, and the conversation came up over the holidays with a neighbor of mine. Just this it just seems like anymore we're being asked to tip for so many things that we weren't accustomed to tipping for before. And we've talked about this before on Sunrise Extra, but I don't think it hurts to bring it up again. The drive-through experience at the local fast food restaurants being number one.
Now, Rod, you were saying that Burgerville is,
Yes.
They ask for a tip, or how does it work?
I, as a consumer, had you just pushed me off the cliff, and I am done. I am done with all of it. This was my experience. I mean, it happens.
Tell the story. So you're in the car. Is there a line? You have to sign a paper with a tip line, or do they ask you? How does it work?
This was Burgerville, if you know the exact location. It's the one on the corner of Highway 99 and 99th Street up in Hazeldale. And for a while, they've had a little placard in the window that says tips are appreciated. Now they have purchased, like a lot of businesses do, the little iPad that they flip around, and it says tip. Which one would you like? Now, they don't hand it to you to do that, or at least when I went through, they didn't. The person flipped it around so I could see, and they asked me which button, tip-wise, would I like to hit, the 20% or the 15%, whatever. And I said, again, this is a drive-thru.
There is a button that should say
This
skip.
was me getting a hamburger at a drive-thru, not with 20 people in the car. This is me getting a burger in a drive-thru. And I said, well, I assume there's a no-tip button. Is that right? And she said, well, yeah, it's over here. And I said, well, that's the button for me.
Yeah.
And got kind of an attitude for it. But for me, I'm like,
it's an awkward conversation.
that's
you have
being
to have in the
pushed off
drive-thru.
of the cliff. You know, you can think about me what you want, but I am not tipping for going through a drive-through at a fast food restaurant.
But you know what? I
just
think it's
not.
that computer or whatever, the iPad screen.
Yeah.
It's the default screen. When you swipe a card, it comes up with that. And I've seen, I've been at somewhere where it's like, no, this is not a tipping situation. And so I just saw the button that said no tip, and I didn't feel bad about it, and they didn't see, and whatever. But yes, I did hit that.
But this person said, would you like me to hit the 20%? They took, or would you like me to hit the 15%?
Oh, because you couldn't touch it yourself?
And I couldn't touch it myself. And then I said, I assume there's a no tip button you can hit, because they were controlling it.
That's
and they said, well, yes, there is. And I said, well, that's the button for me.
Okay.
So is there any, there's no scenario then in a drive-through where you could see tipping any amount just for, so
and
that's
I have the
just a
right to say that
non-starter.
because I served burgers in a drive-through for 6.5 years at a time where the policy was that the company would feel insulted if a customer, same thing as being a flight attendant. The airline's policy has always been the company would be insulted if a customer tipped, because that's saying that, no, this is what we offer you. We're thrilled that you're here, and this is what we offer you.
What year was that, years that you worked as a fast food person?
This would have been 1970s to 1980s.
It's a much different time.
But just
we've
saying,
never
we're all
tipped in a
like this. But to
drive-thru.
me, it pushed me off the cliff. I no longer tip any situation where I had kind of fallen into the trap, that's the way to put it in my opinion, of handing out $1 here. I have not done any longer since that moment in that drive-thru. That was just for me as a consumer saying, I am done. Tipping, I mean, I grew up where tipping was someone took care of you for a period of time. Most likely it was the server at a restaurant. Right?
Or it could have been the delivery person for your newspaper.
And I may tip you 50%.
Right.
At a restaurant, if you have a smile on your face and you've really made my experience there wonderful.
Oh, that's an interesting,
But
that's an
this
interesting
business
comment.
of you're a widget worker. Let's bring up the coffee barista. Coffee barista is a widget worker. Their widget is a coffee that they are making and serving to you. That's no different than a person reaching up and grabbing the hammer off of the
And
shelf
just
at a
handing it
hardware
to you.
store and handing it to me, in my opinion. You're not spending any extra time. You're standing in almost a stationary position, being paid $15, $16, $17 an hour to grab a coffee and give it to me.
Yeah.
I don't know what's more interesting, the comments
That's
from
a
Rodney
widget.
or the reactions from Miss Braxton?
That's a widget. Sorry, it's a widget.
I take exception with the people who are baristas or any other kind of service workers being widget makers.
Well, I'm a widget. We're all widget workers to some
totally
degree.
disagree with that.
My widget is the
okay,
weather
this is the
Never
way I
mind the
look. It
labeling
is
though, Brenda.
awkward. It is awkward. I guess I'm the odd person out. I think a couple different things. You know, people, I feel extremely grateful to have what I have, to basically have a job during this pandemic, to be one of the people who came out okay, you know, in every single way. And whenever they flip that screen whether we're interacting over the counter or anything else. Because I can, I do, right? People are in different situations, and I always give that little bit of grace because I can, and maybe I won't be able to all the time. Maybe not, and then I won't. But because I can, I do. That's the way I look at it, especially in these days when you see so many people not making enough money to survive in the city or to make a decent be able to afford rent, be able to afford all these things. It's so expensive. And I don't know what that's a bigger issue than tipping.
Well, I wonder if, because drive-through, no one's ever tipped at a drive. I mean, like, you know, really, it's not a practice. And so, but I wonder, because it is Burgerville, they went union, they're unionized, and I wonder if that is part of, it plays into it in some way, but also I think it is a default screen of those, you know, deals that pops that up.
Think like Burgerville, McDonald's, all these places, I always see a line when I drive down Sunnyside. There are always people buying stuff. You're telling me McDonald's, as long as it's been around, like, it seems like those companies, I'm not just picking on McDonald's, any of those big companies are making enough money to pay their workers.
That's why we're not tipped.
They're but they're literally, right? Aren't they? Some of them, they're not. Just let me finish. They're not. Again, some of these big companies, they're not making as much as their shareholders would like. Right?
Well, sure, but it's an entry. It's a, you know, it is not a job where you are to expect you're going to make big money.
You need
or a fantastic salary or anything like that.
Yeah. Outside of personal skills, you don't need any like skills that you would have to go to school for to do that job. My thought is that if you were complaining about what you're making in a certain job, you know, did you go to school for something? Did you put in the hard work? Did you study? You know, I only make as much as I'm going to make here in TV. I've reached the ceiling. I'm aware of that. If I stay at this job, I am making pretty much no more money now than I will 15, 20 years from now. I've hit the ceiling. And I don't blame anyone at the station for that happening. I say to myself, well, if I really wanted a job where I could have made super duper dough, I probably should have stayed in school longer to become a doctor or a lawyer, something along those lines, right? I mean, I can't imagine someone being upset that they're not getting paid enough if they're taking a job where they know they didn't have to do any training to get the job. It was an entry-level job.
You know what, I feel like when you say it, like, again, like many things, it literally is one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. It's never that simple.
Right.
It's never that simple. And is it even sustainable? I mean, I feel like we're here in a bubble talking about stuff that doesn't really affect us in a huge way, except I don't want to tip you. I mean, it's so simplistic, and it does make perfect sense when you say it like we're saying it. I'm just saying it's more complicated than that.
Well, I think in some cases nerves are up for consumers, such as myself, because we're also in a period of inflation where things have just gotten expensive. And for me, my thought process goes to, I just gave you I'll bring up the cup of coffee again. I just gave you $5 for a cup of coffee.
Right.
And you're making $16, $17, which, and I said time out a moment ago. Personally, I think $16, $17 an hour for a minimum wage job in those simple jobs, which I've held many of them in my life, is not a bad wage. And we'll probably agree to disagree on that. But I just don't. To Drew's point,
Portland's minimum wage goes up this year.
$50 an hour, you probably need to find something else to do.
Excuse me.
Katie says, but what if you can't afford to go to college or get trained?
Right.
Stanford says old and outdated 70s and 80s and get off my lawn ideas are dead and gone.
Courtney Willingham says, what about the gas station pump person? We used to tip them back in the day, but now they don't do the extra stuff like before, so a lot of people don't tip anymore.
Right.
Oh
Well,
my
there's
gosh,
only
I
two
think I
states where they
wasn't
are.
driving back then. Did they used to tip? I
yeah.
don't remember that at all.
I mean, I remember, well, I don't remember, but yeah, it seems like, yeah.
You know what, I mean, Oregon and New Jersey are the only two states where they actually still pump your gas. So there's a reason why, you know, it's stopped across the country. But I remember my mom tipping the gas station attendant all the time when they did the extras. They would wipe your windows off. I guess that was pretty much the extra. But
Check your oil.
But there were some places, you know, back in the early 80s before they changed the laws where you rolled into some places and they still pumped your gas. So my mom always thought, oh, they're pumping the gas here, we should tip them. Versus us getting out of the car and doing it ourselves.
And that's why we voted to stay, you know, to keep more jobs going. And so anyway, it is an interesting conversation. So again, Kotchka, 22% service fee. We have the article, and you can read more information on kgw.com. Thanks to you guys for weighing in. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.